Hello, Anna here. We're going to now talk about the last video, the last section in our video series on the central nervous system with the brain, and we're going to focus in on brain pathology now. So this is just super basic, kind of doing a cursory overview of a couple of different things that affect the brain. Hopefully you find this part fun. All right, so Parkinson's disease. So remember that basal nuclei stuff that we looked at in the brainstem? Okay, so these islands of gray matter. So there's one area right over here, and if we look, we've got a cerebral peduncle. Okay, and then this area is called the substantia nigra. So right here, substantia nigra. And you see all these black dots? All right, those black dots are actually melanin granules. Melanin is interesting because we, in our bodies, in this particular area of the brainstem, convert melanin into dopamine inside the neurons of this section of the brainstem. If you destroy those neurons, then you cannot make dopamine. And if you become low in dopamine, then what happens is you start to experience things like tremors, rigidity, difficulty initiating movement. And then right over here in a little box is kind of a collection of various symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is when this area is damaged. What's interesting is that to see symptoms, you need about 70% of these neurons to be damaged. So by the time someone sees evidence of Parkinson's disease, you've already gotten extensive damage to the brainstem. All right, let's see what's going to be next. Ooh, let's talk about Alzheimer's next. Let's see, let's go to the next slide. Alzheimer's. You'll study this in pathophys. Okay, the key components of Alzheimer's is we're seeing a shortage of acetylcholine and, more importantly, structural changes to the brain associated with inflammation. So inflammation appears to be, as they do more and more work, the critical factor with Alzheimer's disease. And it's going to affect the entire brain. And where we really notice it is when it starts affecting the association areas involved with memory and cognition. Essentially, due to inflammation, we start to get the loss of neurons. The neurons die or are killed. And then the gyri, where those neurons lived, begin to shrink. So we can see that. What you're noticing, the thing that's the inflammation, all right, is leading to this part. So here you can see the normal neurons and their interstitium. With Alzheimer's disease, we see the breaking of the cytoskeleton structures within the neuron, which means we have difficulty when we've got these what's called neurofibrillary tangles. You have difficulty moving things within the cell. Okay. We also see the collection of amyloid plaques. All right. These are proteins that get broken off. So tau proteins, all right, that are going to get broken off. No. Sorry, wrong thing. Not tau proteins. Those are the neurofibrillary tangles. Anyway, they're over here. They stick out over here, and they tend to get broken off, and then they clump and stick. Okay. And those are the beta amyloid plaques. Okay. So we got plaques right here, and we got neurofibrillary tangles right here. All right. All right, so this is one of the slides I use in my pathophys class, and what I like about it is the way it shows you the development of these plaque formations over time. So this is someone who's relatively normal. So you can see the projection of processes, so axons, dendrites, all of those here. We got glial cells, we got some cell bodies, okay? Now over here, you're starting to see, actually that's a plaque right there. The accumulation of beta amyloid plaques here and here, and you're starting to see more of them clumping up. Then over time, I get even more of them, and they begin to grow in size, and then I get more of them, and then I get more of them. And the more of these that I get, the more difficulty you're going to have normal function. I wonder if I can change the color on this. Will that change the color? Oh no, it gives me a lightsaber. Hey, how's that? That's really weird. Why do I have a lightsaber now? I guess I can do this. There. These are the really big beta amyloid plaques. And this is going to interfere the ability of neurons to function. It also increases inflammation and will cause nearby neurons to begin to experience necrosis. All right? All right, here's an MRI, and I find this one interesting. This one's focusing in on glucose metabolism. So this is a normal person, and you can see how everything is lit up really nicely and how this person's brain is processing the sugar. Whereas over here with Alzheimer's, you can see there are some places that's using the sugar, but a lot of areas have kind of been grayed out, and you can see you've lost a lot of functioning there. All right. The tau protein. So these are the neurofibrillary tangles right here, okay? And basically what you have, so we're inside the cell. So let's look at this right here. So this is your neuron, okay? The cytoskeleton is inside the cell, and I have these microtubules running down the length of the axon. So we've taken this and we've made it bigger. So in normal ones, you've got these nice railroad tracks, okay? With Alzheimer's, these railroad tracks degrade and snap, okay? So if you look over here at a picture, this is normal. This one is snapped. Both of these is snapped. And now the railroad basically gets all jumbled up. And now you can't move things correctly down the axon, and you're more likely to start the process of that particular cell dying. All right, so again, some more slides for my pathophys class. It's good. I think everybody should know the difference between a concussion and a contusion and a hemorrhage. So concussion, this is bruising of the brain, and it can be really mild, short-lived, no permanent damage, or you can have a lot of bruising that can cause permanent damage. And repeated concussions, even if they are mild, I mean, maybe even so mild you don't realize you're getting them, will lead to the accumulation of inflammation in the area and can lead to permanent damage. You may have heard about the football players and having the encephalopathies. So concussions are a serious issue, all right? Even little ones need to be taken seriously. Now, a contusion is the next step up. So you have some kind of trauma that leads to destruction of the particular tissue. So some kind of blunt trauma or whiplash trauma. So you got crushing of the brain tissue. An example would be like if you get a contusion in the brainstem, because the brainstem is important for that reticular activating system, it will lead to a coma, all right? Now, when you see the word hemorrhage, that is where you actually have bleeding, okay? Now, sometimes we say you've got a hematoma, all right? So with a hematoma, you have bleeding, but it accumulates into a little pocket, all right? So that's what the hematoma is, an accumulation of blood or blood clots in a particular area. The reason these are serious is because there's only so much room in your neural cavity because of the bones, all right? You don't have much room for your brain in there. So any swelling is going to put pressure on the brain tissue, and it could potentially, with the pressure, cut off blood flow and lead to death of the tissue. If the swelling is significant and near where the foramen magnum is, you can actually push part of the brain through the foramen magnum, and you're going to die really, really fast, okay? Now, cerebral edema, all right, this is swelling of the brain, all right? So you're basically going to have an increase in cerebral spinal fluid and interstitial fluids. All right, this is often secondary to any kind of inflammation or water retention. And it's going to be, it doesn't have to be associated with also problems with drainage, but it can be. All right. All right, let's look at some gross pictures. All right, so we've got some nice hemorrhaging over here. Okay, we've got a really nice hematoma where you've got a pocket of bleeding here. You've got a pocket of bleeding here, and you can see how it's basically displaced to the brain tissue. Okay, whereas this one would have been like a subdural hematoma, so it's around the outside, and these are internal. That's internal and that's internal. All right, what's next? Let's talk about strokes a little bit more. Okay, so a stroke can also be called a cerebrovascular accident or a hemorrhagic infarct. Okay, third leading cause of death in the U.S. and one of the most common disorders that affect the brain. Okay, only 35% of people who have these are alive 3 years after the event, so they are serious. Okay. When you have a stroke, obviously you're going to lose blood circulation and you're going to have brain tissue that begins to die as a result. All right, here are the basic causes. One of the side effects, and this is probably the thing that you're most familiar with strokes, is people have them and then they have paralysis on one side of the body. So if the stroke was in the right hemisphere, they have paralysis on the left side. If the stroke was in the left hemisphere, then they have problems on the right side of their body, including potentially language issues. Okay. Now, with time and therapy, it is possible for the other parts of the brain to take over the duties of the damaged areas, so you can recover from it to a certain extent. Okay. Now, less well known are TIAs, so transient ischemic attacks. All right. They last 5 to 50 minutes. You get temporary numbness, paralysis, impaired speech. The reason TIAs need to be seriously monitored and taken seriously, like you should go to the doctor, is because you can start having these frequently and then they will lead to a massive stroke. So they're like warning signs that everybody needs to take seriously. So here is another picture of a hemorrhagic infarct. You can see I don't have nearly as much bleeding as that other picture I showed you, but we do have pockets, and you can see how it's extended down into these other areas that's affected. Okay, let's look at some more pictures, because who doesn't want to look at disturbing pictures? Actually, this one's not about infarcts. This one's about brain cancer. What's crazy about cancer is what type of cancer you have is determined by where the cancer started in the body. So where did the cancer start? All right, so what's crazy is you can have skin cancer, melanoma, migrate to the brain. You can have lung cancer in the brain. You can have breast cancer in the brain. Okay, sometimes these cancers are very slow growing when they get into the brain, but they also can be really, really fast. So you can see this was a normal brain scan, and 3 months later you can see the progression of a tumor. This tumor may not be malignant. There are a number of what we call benign tumors that happen to be fast growing, and obviously they can be very deadly in the brain because there is no real room for them to go. Okay, let's see. The last slide, we're going to talk about cranial deformation. I like this. I studied it with my dissertation. So basically with cranial deformation, it can be purposeful. I think we've looked at that with the skeletal system. I had a slide where I showed purposeful cranial deformation, where they alter the shape of the head. Nowadays, it tends to be accidental, but we have seen an increase in the number of kids with cranial deformation that is accidental, and it is associated with the back to sleep program. So we tell everybody to make sure you put your kids on their back when they sleep, so that they don't have SIDS and then die, okay? But then they have all of their weight on the back of the skull right here, and they tend to get this flattened back of the skull, okay? Also, any children that are born premature, when you look at fetal skull bones, they're about the thickness of a Pringles chip, okay? When you're a neonate, they're about the thickness of like 3 or 4 Pringles chips stacked on top of each other. So when the baby is a preemie and it lays on its back or its side, wherever the pressure is tends to flatten it, okay? Now, aesthetically, some people don't like the cranial deformation and other people think it's pretty hot, okay? But that's not the issue that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about synostosis. And synostosis is when the sutures close, all right? If it happens on the skull of a growing child, we call it craniosynostosis, and we throw in the word premature. The reason this is dangerous is because then the brain doesn't have room to grow. Now, if we look at this kid, all right, and we've got a sagittal suture here, all right, and then you got a lambdoid suture here, and it goes like this. You got the squamosal here, you got the coronal here, and you got the metopic here. If the lambdoidal suture here goes through synostosis, the brain can still grow in these directions and you are fine. However, sometimes with craniosynostosis, more than one suture will close. So if the lambdoidal closes and the squamosal closes, the brain case will not be able to expand sufficiently, and you're going to have issues with retardation because the brain is being squashed. Okay, so prevention, like if you have a preemie, they tell you to do all of these things. Okay, if it is severe and they are concerned about craniosynostosis, there is surgery. There is also this headband or helmet. And for me, so I had 2 preemies. So our pediatrician was a instead of an MD, so you've got MDs and you've got DOs, Doctor of Osteopathies. They both have the same credentials in terms of being a fully qualified medical doctor. But DOs also get training in the manipulation of the body. Yeah, maybe you can kind of think of it a little bit as chiropractic. But anyway, my kid's pediatrician did stretches, so I had 2 preemies. My son especially got really flat on the sides. And he did stretches, and like literally it went from being like this, and it popped out after one session to have a nice normal curve. So there are other things you can do besides these more extreme interventions, okay? Over here, I've got, you can see this baby right here, the flattening there, and then the curvature after some treatment, and they've got some other pictures of him as well. Okay? All right, that is the end of this short little talk on pathologies associated with the brain. Thank you for watching.